So thanks so much for joining. And today I'm so delighted to have Donna Stevenson on board. Donna, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Una. Really excited to share thoughts on this one. It's really important, isn't it? Back to school, back into learning.
Such a big topic for all
Yes,
households.
yeah.
So much going on this time of year. So hopefully this evening, both between myself and Donna, in quite a conversational enough format, but hopefully there'll be lots of key takeaways, things that will be easy to implement at home in the next kind of week or two, depending upon what timelines are for going back to school. So I'm just going to put up a few slides, nothing too heavy, so hopefully everybody can see them. And I'll leave them this way if that's okay, just as people come in and out. I'll be able to kind of see them through the side. Just an overview, as we mentioned, if possible, if we can all stay on mute, guys, just so we don't interrupt the topics. And again, we're more than happy to take any questions at the end. As mentioned again, obviously it's recorded, and if you leave the meeting, hopefully we can get you back in as quickly as possible. I'll be letting people in and out as best as we can. As Donna mentioned, and as we've started today, obviously today's topic is back to school. I'll just do a brief overview as to the bits of the work that we do, guys, and then Donna will give a little bit of background as herself and a bit about Succeed with Dyslexia organisation in the UK. And then we'll start in as quickly as possible, really, to some potential top tips, bits and pieces, practical things that can be applied at home with this busy period of back to school. If everybody had a second, though, I would really appreciate if everybody could either go on to our Facebook or on an Instagram page, Blossom for Life, and we put up a poll question this afternoon, and it was actually suggested to us by some kids that we do some work with, and they're forever coming up with different types of questions that they'd like to ask and figure out. So if everybody could go on for a second and just find what the question is, whoever gets it first, feel free to either put it in the chat or shout away. You may have to follow the pages in order to see some of the poll, but it'd be great to know people's bits of feedback or what they think the answer is. Just a nice, easy icebreaker to get us all warmed up a little for today's session. So we won't spell long now, guys. So just 2 seconds and we'll fire in. But if everybody has a quick chance to have a look through, that would be great. I'm going to pull up the question myself here. So it should be quite easy to find. It's our both posts went up this afternoon, so it should be quite visible for people. Hopefully anybody's been able to see it. Great. Yeah, we just got one or two messages. Perfect. Thanks, guys. So it was about what country is the shortest school day? Any ideas, Donna, what country might have the shortest school day?
Gosh, no, France, maybe?
Good guess. Yeah, I
That
would kind
really
of
was a
think.
guess.
Yeah, I know. I had a feeling as well. It's actually Finland.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's actually Finland. So they have a kind of a more holistic educational model, which lots of our kids are fascinated with. The less time in school as possible, is usually their approach to any of these types of questions. So again, just something obviously to ease us in to today's content. So very, very brief overview. I'm Una Buckley. I'm the founder of Blossom for Life, and we work with students with learning differences, dyslexia, autism, dyscalculia, everything and anything really in between. And we work obviously with kids in the education system and then obviously adults in workplaces and teacher training programs. And we carried a range of kind of assessments and consultations and a wide range of support that we can offer, along with lots of these free workshops and webinars that we end up doing, which is so delighted to be able to facilitate. These are some of the organisations we've worked with to date, both in Ireland and in the UK, and we've been very fortunate to have partnerships in lots of different spaces, and we'll hopefully continue to keep going on those. If anybody has any questions throughout the session or even at the end for either myself or Donna will supply Succeed with Dyslexia contact details. But again, feel free to send us an email or get on to us on social media if you have any follow-on questions or questions even throughout the session. Please feel free to link in through those channels with those. A little bit about Donna, and I won't speak for Donna, so I'll let Donna come in at this stage. Plus, there's a lot of text on this particular slide, so my apologies, I didn't realise that we're so text heavy. So, Donna, would you like to give us a little bit of a background to yourself and to Succeed with Dyslexia?
Yeah, no problem. Hi everyone, lovely to meet you all. So yes, Succeed with Dyslexia. We provide a platform for our community for lots of different purposes. It's about raising awareness, it's about making connections, it's about highlighting key issues. For example, we recently did a learning festival all around offending and unidentified dyslexia and neurodiversity. So, we really raised some issues there. We had some key figures, experts along the way. So that's some of the work that we do. A lot of what we do is non-profit. My job as head of training and assessment is to support obviously a lot of what we do in terms of raising awareness, but also to work with organisations as well to ensure that they're doing right by the individuals that they engage with who have dyslexia and neurodiverse needs as well. And we also do assessments, specifically workplace needs assessments we're being asked a lot of these days. So this is with adults looking at their working practices. But as it says here, and there's lots of text because I'm quite old, Una, so my bio is getting bigger and bigger as I get older. But I did start my professional life with children. I think I said to Una the other day, I work mostly with adults now. It's become a real newer passion for me. I absolutely love it. But I really used to love working with kids as well. So I did start my professional life as a nursery nurse and a primary school teacher. I'm also a mum, and I think that helps as well. So I've had many times over the years at this time of the summer when you do start to think about getting back into learning and so on. And that's why it was great to link with Una here at Succeed, because this is the type of work that we do, supporting the community to support all those folks out there who need some guidance and so on. So what I'll do is we'll share with you our YouTube channel and so on, where we've got lots of free resources and lots of free webinars as well. So yeah, I'm really excited about this evening, Una. I can't wait to get stuck in and have an explore of all these key issues, really.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Donna. So lovely to hear bits of your overview and background, and it's great to build that, I think, link and connection with some of our listeners that they know a little bit, of your own
Yes,
path,
definitely. Yeah.
and things that you've been through as well, which is great. So what we might do, I know Donna has some slides to share as well, guys. Donna, if it's okay with you, I might just pull up some of the topics that I have from my
Yes,
side,
please do,
and
Una.
then we
Just
can,
start
move
chatting.
through.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
can move through
Sounds
your
great.
slides then again in a few minutes. So guys, again, like nothing here is going to be hopefully revolutionary, but hopefully you might pick up some tips to maybe help you do something that you've been wanting to do. So I put on this first few slides here a mix of things from what we would work with students on helping them, with the back to school, and just maybe some general suggestions. So our first one is kind of on the organization piece. So anything, Donna, that you might suggest from this area, for parents tuning in today that maybe could help them, become a little bit more, let's say, organized with their back to school preparations.
Yeah, no problem. It's a great place to start, really. When you'd asked me to do this session, Una, I was thinking, what age group are we talking about here? Our little ones or our older kids? But actually, the patterns are very similar. I think whether we're talking about, a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old, really. In terms of organisation, then, I mean, as parents, and I'm guessing tonight most of you are parents and grandparents and carers and so on. I think it's largely our job a lot of the time, isn't it, to keep our little ones organised, whether it is a 4-year-old or similarly a 14-year-old. I think what we find when we're looking at neurodiverse children is that sometimes some of these organizational skills can be a real challenge, and they're going to take a wee bit longer to master some of those skills, literally from have I got the right books in my school bag? Have I made sure I've packed my PE kit, and so on and so forth, through to organizing their thoughts as well if they're trying to think about, what they've learned that day and so on. There's lots of different ways that we organize ourselves, isn't there? And so I think as parents, then our job is to model what it looks like to be organized in that way, as well as being a coach really for our children and making sure, it's that checklist. Have you got this? Have you got that? With the hope that after a while, over, and sometimes it's years, they've absorbed that as well. Through then to something really obvious that maybe some of you already do, is having those lists, on the fridge or something in the bedroom, something nice and colourful and pictorial, where we're also encouraging, I think, Una, independence as well. So I know a few years ago I saw a great one where the parents had put together each school day with a picture of what their child needed to have, and it was like on a wipe on, wipe off board, and the little one would pack the item, tick, and then the next one, tick. It's that scaffolding, I think, Una, and then that reinforcement as well, and trying to make sure that, I suppose what we don't want is learned helplessness with our kids, isn't it? We want to scaffold and help, but not get to the point where they're always relying on us as well. That's where it's good to get a bit of, interaction with them. So they're getting their PE shorts out and putting it in the bag, but where they're guiding them through really. But what are you thinking about that, Una? That's when you say organisation, they're the things that's kind of coming to my mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously, being dyslexic myself and having dysgraphia, for me in school, the organization actually was the opposite way. So it become a little bit borderline, actually a bit of an issue. Everything had to be so super
Oh,
organized,
really? Yeah,
unless,
interesting.
I
Yeah.
just have anxiety then that I'd forget something. And we see that actually as quite a common pattern with some of our students, either predominantly probably girls that are trying to be more organized, or then you've people that are the other end of the spectrum where they just, kind of switch off with the organization skills. But I completely agree with what you're saying. The picture diagram approach, definitely for people that have a different way of learning, eases that strain of constantly reading or constantly, looking at things, or the misspelling, or, that element where we can limit words is often very, very useful. So the incorporation of colour or different alternative versions. And we have a family recently and they started doing bits of voice notes. So they'll just listen to it back in the morning. So their list is, recorded, it's audio based instead of it being on a page or being drawn. And I suppose it's about finding what kind of will work for your household, what will work for your child or student, and how that can be as easily implemented, as possible in the day-to-day dilemmas. I think the other strand to that is we do a lot of work with, the day doesn't really start for school. We feel that morning, it's usually the night before. So some schools over here at the moment still hopefully won't have gone back in yet. We have a lot of students back in this week, but only for a few hours. So it's about that kind of prep beforehand. How do we get organized so it doesn't have to be last minute, or doesn't have to be an extra element of rushing, and kind of be earlier the previous day, let's say, before they go back into school, so that things are as organized as best as possible, and then it alleviates the stress as well that morning.
Yeah, I love that, Una. I think it's layers to this as well, isn't it? It's on a Sunday, afternoon, evening, looking across the whole week. And
Yes.
then, like you say, maybe the night before, so that it's not that crazy panic the morning of, because I think we know for our community, if it is that panic, it can really take, quite a few hours actually then during the day for the levels to settle and so on. So that if it's been a mad rush as you heading into school, that can detract then, certainly in the first few learning periods of getting, back into learning and getting your head into the lesson and being able to engage, I think. But just
completely
out of
is.
interest, I've worked with a lot of adults who talk about what you've just said, Una, the other end of that spectrum, which is being almost overcompensating, super organized. And I don't know if you've seen something that was on the media today. I think it's connected in some ways to what you're saying. This burnt toast philosophy, in terms of if it's to minimize anxiety. And please do share in the chat if, like me, you've seen this. It's been on TikTok, but I don't look at TikTok. SWD is on TikTok, but I am not on TikTok. This young lady shared this philosophy about minimizing her own anxiety, saying that if something's not right as you want it to be, if the toast is burnt, don't get anxious, just take it in your stride and see it as it's not, this has happened because it's not meant to be, and so on. And she was sharing that it's really helped with her anxiety in that way. And when you're talking like that, Una, it just made me think of that, because how did you cope with that then, in terms of trying to minimize the anxiety if everything wasn't just as you needed it to be?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Donna. It's great for people to have extra range of tips, and feel free to look into Donna's suggestions. And from my side, I think yeah, it was a challenging process. There's no doubt about that. And I've used it and developed it as a skill set. So it still
Yes.
is very evident
Yeah.
in my current working life, and probably a little bit more so than a healthy level. But from a school basis, and you mentioned Sundays used to just be total dread. I just, and even that's the whole way as I moved through school and became confident and did well in exams, but I would still have just dread every Sunday with how am I going to go in and face the next 5 days. I think what was useful for me, it is in a control aspect. So when so much of school is that you can't control, and you go in and sit in a class, and maybe about 10% of it, being realistic, you might take in, give or take. Obviously, some classes are different, but when a lot of information is thrown at you in quite a fast pace and quite a challenging environment, every day you have a dwindling sense of less and less control over what is happening and what's going on, and your direction, and when you're going to finish this school and when you're going to get on with your life. So for me, the over organization of having everything color coded and in a folder and in a plastic pocket and labeled 25 times, thankfully wasn't as bad as that, but it probably could have been if I allowed myself to do it. That was the only sense of control that I got. So in a world that was quite chaotic for me, and I didn't really ever find my feet in, and that helped ease some bit of say, that I knew, okay, well, if I'm going into this class, I don't really probably know all of the content, but at least I'll know I'll always have my books, and
Yes.
I'll always have attempted to do with my homework, whether it's right or wrong. And that would ease that extra stress element. I think for me, I wouldn't have been able to get through the system if I didn't develop some of those mechanisms. But it is important to say that they can be overdeveloped, and they can be developed to an unhealthy level, and that is quite common in a lot of students that we would work with. And so it's by finding that balance really as best as possible.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It does give us a lot to think about, doesn't it? Because with our kids, you're likely to see the whole range of these differences manifest, Una. When you first said organisation to me, I automatically thought the kind of idea about helping our kids to get organised. But what you described there, yeah, that's very much part of the journey, isn't it? Um, and like you said, I suppose that was a coping mechanism in a way. Like you said, to try and control a situation that you maybe felt out of control, which leads us nicely, I think, to this next one, which is the stress and so on, isn't it?
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think we've kind of crossed lots of it as
Yeah,
well
it
around,
does. It
how
links.
we get
Yeah.
organized affects our stress levels, and, how we perform affects our stress levels, tests, and, moving through systems all affects stress levels, I suppose, really. From your side, Donna, anything that you might suggest around coping mechanisms or strategies as well, even maybe as a parent, at home when we get a lot of questions of when my child's really stressed, we absorb the stress, and then you might take that into your own, day ahead. What maybe suggestions could be provided for parents so that they can ease bits of that pressure that they put on themselves as well?
A great question, because I think these days a lot of us are under stress for many different reasons, isn't it? And let alone the fact that you might be worrying about your children and so on. I think, my first reaction to your question, Una, is to talk about the so this is as a parent, as a carer, as a grandparent, and so as the adult, really, the responsible adult. It's to think about what we can do to support our children. So rather than trying to pass on our own stress and anxiety, our challenge is to, even if we feel that way, to try and mask that from our kids because we don't want to pass it on. What we need to be doing, I think, is to really be our kids' best cheerleader, really, and to support them. And more, this idea of the growth mindset is something I've got really interested in. And I know here at SWD we are as well, more generally. I suppose it's what we used to call positive thinking, if you like, but it's this real positive, can do approach. And what we're discovering, if we have this positive growth mindset as parents, as educators, whatever, and we, try and instill this in our kids, it can really help with stress levels as well. It doesn't mean we negate, the experience, what it feels like to have stress and so on, and just kind of, say, oh, don't worry about that, just keep thinking positive. It's more meaningful than that. And it's about trying to encourage this positive self talk with our children. And the way that we can do that is by encouraging them, us kind of saying those things to them and encouraging them to kind of absorb it from us. So that's on the more kind of thought processes level. I think in the practical terms, it's looking at what the hot spots are, what's the triggers for this stress, really. Whether it is, as we've just been saying, Una, is it because, we think our kids aren't that organized or too organized, and we need to maybe encourage them to relax a wee bit? Is it because, they're anxious about homework or whatever? And I know homework's on here, so we've got all these potential hot spots. Could be about friendship groups, transitional time, going into a different, going into high school, secondary school, and so on. And it's looking at yes, how I suppose, and I'll speak as a mum now, I suppose your first instinct as a parent and so on is to think, right, I want to take that stress away from my child. But I think more importantly, because my kids are older now, so I'm the mum of adults, is to think, how can I equip them to cope with the stress? And again, it's kind of modeling how one copes with stress, I suppose. Una, as much as we can, because I know for a lot of us adults, we're still getting to grips with it ourselves. But again, it comes back, I suppose, similar pattern actually about what we've said about organisation. How can we encourage our children to healthily react to stress it's going to sound odd, guys, I'm going to say in a positive way, because I know that we often think of stress as just a horrible negative thing. And as much as we can, guide them through their own resolution of that, rather than maybe to go with our first instinct sometimes is to just try and take it away from them. It's to try and coach them through how to handle it, and just open and honest dialogue, Una, because especially when our kids get older, sometimes they don't want to share anymore. And I think journaling can help. I think getting active can help as well. I think, meditation and those types of things can help. And as I say, we can model those things for our kids and maybe make a thing of it one evening that we're all going to sit and do a guided meditation, just something like that can really help as well. But I'd love to know your thoughts on that, Una, as well.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Thank you, Donna. And there's a lot of that that we'll get to with the, the wellness piece as well.
Yes,
And
yeah.
that's all really, really important and, really needed. You mentioned we do have, and it has been proved by science that we have some elements of good stress, and we do
Yes,
need some element of that to survive. But when I suppose a student has a different way of learning, usually they're fight and flight, and we won't go into a neuroscience lesson now today, but obviously feel free to look into some of these aspects a little bit more if you have somebody at home with maybe higher stress levels than what you would like. But person generally with a learning difference has higher chances of being either overly stressed or often being stressed about what we may think is the wrong thing. And that's something that can be a very, evidence challenge. And on our next point about the homework, I suppose the way we would see, stress the most evident in a school context. Actually, sometimes, yes, very much so, and going in and out of school is a big challenge, but actually coming home and still having work to do usually
yes,
causes a huge contender of stress, both for the parents and for the child or the student or even the adult. And all of those different dilemmas of trying to, figure out what went on for the last 6 hours and then do further work from that. Now, hopefully, in an Ireland base anyway, with everybody UK, that may change. And there is talk still going on about alleviating or eliminating homework fully. But as we currently stand, homework policies are different from school to school base. And, we find that it isn't a one size all fits approach. Some kids that we will work with like to do it straight away when they come in. Some like to take a little bit of a break. But I suppose trying to, come up with a system with the school that, the homework is manageable and that it isn't having a massive drain every single day, because that then affects the next day, which affects the next day.
yes, yeah. And I think Una, increasingly we're aware of the importance, it sounds so obvious, but the importance of rest and sleep,
Mm.
isn't it? There's so many of us adults and kids who just aren't getting, um, the sleep that we need, the rest that we need. And it is a challenge when you know that, your child's going to come home with a couple of hours of homework on the back of being in a busy school day. And we know that neurodiverse children can feel fatigue for lots of different reasons, you know, after a busy school day. Sometimes it's connected with the fatigue of masking and so on, isn't it, Una? So, and trying to keep up and so on. And then the last thing they want to do when they get home and they're ready to decompress is that they've got a few hours ahead of them of homework. So it's good to hear that that's in negotiations. It's not, I mean, there's been lots here in the UK around those issues. We're not quite there yet, unfortunately, but happily I'm hearing more and more schools are open to discuss the opportunities to get creative about how we get our kids to do their homework in that way.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think that's a great point, Donna, about being that creative aspect, and
yes, yeah,
building and harnessing that relationship as best as
yeah,
possible with the school and with the teachers to figure out a little bit of a plan if they're open to compromise and suggestions, as to what works for you and for your household and what are the essentials, and we're very avid on the fact that, okay, well, the two main compulsory subjects from an Irish education system are always English and maths. And lots of students may have Irish exemptions and languages, so we won't get into those at the moment. But unfortunately, until a child or a student is 18 and they finish their leaving cert, the two core mandatory subjects that they would have to do within reason, unless something is changed or something happens. And I suppose those core subjects, regardless of whatever is going on in the school day, and history and geography and all of these other, let's say, subject orientated and optional subjects, those two core subjects are quite paramount. And during the pandemic, we did a lot of work with kids on basically just those core subjects and those core topics, because they feed into pretty much every other topic as well. So if we can bring it back to basics as to, okay, well, maybe every evening they won't be able to do all of the hours and hours that they might be given or not be given, depending upon the school. But what are the core things that will make actually a difference long term, instead of, tick the box exercises and, these are all these other exercises that often take a huge amount of time but may not be massively beneficial to help the child or the student move along.
Yeah. It's it's fascinating, this idea of, I know we're talking about stress, but like these are all linked. Obviously, we're coming on to homework, which is next on the list. But yeah, I also wonder the role of technology, how that can help sometimes with, if we're talking about homework, which then ultimately feeds into, we hope, reducing stress levels at home and so on. If there isn't so much that, is take home work for children to do as well, regardless of the age. But yeah, it's a huge issue, and certainly one that families reach out to us about in terms of supporting kids through their homework as well, however that may be in terms of the various tasks. Because also, Una, we've got the issue here as well, and I know this happened to me as a parent, is that often your children are working on things, your older children, that you don't necessarily, you can't always support as well. So although you want to support and so on, you're sometimes scratching your head thinking, what can I do here to help with this project when it's beyond my understanding as well? And I think that comes down to then, I suppose, ties in with organisation and everything, the things that we can do as parents and grandparents at home, making sure that, it sounds really obvious, but making sure that there's a quiet space to do this work, that your child's got the necessary tools to hand, the pens, the rulers, whatever it is they need. Hopefully, if you can use technology, I know not everybody's lucky enough to have access to technology, but sometimes using technology can help as well. And again, it's related to stress, isn't it? These things are all overlapped, really. Um,
Completely,
but
yeah.
what are
And
you
the
thinking about
technology.
homework? Do you agree with me if we set the scene for our kids at home, so it's not in front of the telly and you know whatever, so we are trying to help them. I suppose it comes back to organization, doesn't it? We are trying to help them get organized, whether it's as soon as you've come in from school or after dinner, whatever suits. That we're there as parents, grandparents and so on, just trying to set the scene, I suppose, for homework in that way.
Yeah, and I think it ties in with our next topic really, which I think is linked between that routine and wellness
Yes.
piece.
Yeah,
I think
agreed.
that
Yeah.
lots of these strands are intertwined in a sense that, homework being set up as kind of a routine system to some level. I know each day might be different between hobbies and dancing and sport, and again very, very essential and really needed as part of their day-to-day setup. But is there going to be a bit of a routine established so that they have an adequate amount of time whenever they get homework or every evening or however regular that is for the school? And is that, as part of the daily routine? So then they know, okay, well, this kind of time, give or take, is for homework. These kind of times are for activities. And then, as we were mentioning earlier, Donna, these kind of times then are for me to, chill out or have a little bit of
Yeah.
free time, or, play with some Lego or listen to an audiobook, or, get sorted for the next day, or have dinner, and go to
Yes.
bed.
Yeah.
And the day is quite short, really, in a sense, between coming and going and being dropped and collected, or, getting buses to and from primary or else secondary school. It is quite limited, and having that skill set to, help a child or a student at home set up a bit of a schedule for them, that is also, a little bit of a healthy pattern, really, because we can all set up routines that are unsustainable, and by the time midterm comes they're either exhausted or, that system doesn't work. And I think it's about trying to reevaluate as well at those stages and be like, okay, well, what is working, what isn't working, and what can we change, what is within reasonable limits for us to evolve with. Because at this time of year we are super busy, and we've parents left, right and centre, and everybody's so eager to do everything. And then realistically, the Monday to Friday schedule actually is quite short. So, what is realistic? What is essential? And what can we put in as part of a routine to set off on a solid base?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, and I love what you say about evaluating the routine and maybe do that together because, again, it comes back to what we were talking about in terms of this is a whole learning curve for your children, isn't it? Yes, they're learning at school. Yes, they're learning, we hope, when they're doing their homework. But the whole experience of being in education, even ironically when they're not in school and they're at home, is still a learning curve about how you get organized, how you look after your own well-being, making sure that you rest, making sure that you eat well, and so on and so forth. So this is all part of the learning as well. And when I think I've worked over the years with adults who are neurodiverse, and they've shared about their top tips, if you like, secrets of their success, when they do reflect back on their own childhood, it is talking about, the adults who've been in their lives, who've been able to help them develop these good habits, who then, as they've gone into jobs and so on, and again, very unknown territory, often into a new job and so on. With lots of different challenges connected to the person's neurodiversity, that anchor that they've had as children growing up with a family who've been able to encourage some of these great habits, they've said, that was what stood them in good stead, really, as then they've gone into an unknown job or whatever it might be and found that challenging. But actually, it's not totally rocked their absolute foundations because those great foundations have been set up in childhood. And I think that's really, I think sometimes we forget. I know I certainly did sometimes along the way as a parent. I, you kind of forget that how important that stuff is. You think it's all about making sure that your child finishes their reading book and so and get, top marks in their spelling, forgetting about all the other wonderful things that you do as a parent, which is, as you say, Una, making sure that everything's ticking along, um, and you've got your kids in those good habits, really. So yeah, I love everything you've said there. I couldn't agree more.
Well, that's great. I think it's just easing that pressure as well. There's
It
so much
is, yeah.
parent guilt, and there's so much that aspirations, and we're so fortunate to work with so many fabulous families, and our common thread among all of them is that their parents really want to set things up in the best way that they can. And I think it's great credit to everybody coming on this evening and trying to do the best that they can. So I think it's important to acknowledge the work that you put in yourself as a parent, and how that will hopefully pay off. I'm just conscious of time, guys. I know Donna has a few slides also to have a quick run through it. So I'll just kind of fly through some of these we will have mentioned, so we may not need to go on to everything. But we might just have a brief kind of talk, Donna, here about maybe the study and then the exam side, because I know that's a regular topical conversation for most, maybe starting into exam years. Any suggestions you might have around that piece, Donna, where a child maybe now going into starting an exam year setup, or they're unsure about different study techniques and skills, anything that you feel that might help in that area?
Yes, no problem, Una. And yeah, obviously this can be a huge issue for our kids. I think part of it ties back to everything we've just said. It's organisation and routine. I think, I would hope by the time we've got kids who are ready to sit, formal exams, we've maybe managed to get them into some of that good practice, really, in terms of helping them be organised and making sure they're in some sort of learning routine as well. In terms of studying then, ideally, and I'm sure a lot of you have already heard this a number of times, especially you've got neurodiverse children in your lives, we need to really make learning as multi-sensory as we can, as active as we can. It's important for all of us, but especially for our neurodiverse kids. And what we mean by that is something to look at, listen to, and do ideally. That's just it in a very quick nutshell, really. unfortunately, a lot of the time, the way school will share information is not necessarily in that way. So when we've got our kids at home and they're starting to dig out the textbooks and so on, and maybe do some studying, this is where we want to try and encourage them, get really active with their learning. So, mind maps, for example, Una said earlier, little recordings, even if it's just things that they're only going to listen to using their mobile, using your mobile phone. I know most kids usually have mobiles by the time they get to this stage. Things to make the learning active. Also, it's about making connections as well. And that's something I think as a parent, even if you don't necessarily know the topic that your children are studying for, and as I say, it happened to me as a parent, my kids went off into a realm that I just didn't always understand. But what I could do is that I could encourage them to show how they're learning and make connections between the different topics within a cluster of a subject area, for example. So it's almost like creating a learning journal. And what that does is it gives a really great basis and scaffold to hang on the facts really that they've got to learn as they're heading towards exams as well. So I think there's lots of structure. It's get active with learning. We know that a lot of our neurodiverse kids are very creative. So it's getting creative with this stuff, bringing it alive as much as you can, whether it's making, pictures and so on, or it's actually making little recordings and so on. As I say, just getting really, really creative. And it's also trying to team up with others as well. Ideally, we hope by this stage that our kids have made connections with other kids. And I think study buddies and so on are really, really useful and can be done now wonderfully on Zoom and Teams. They don't have to anymore always be together in person, isn't it? Having a little Zoom get together to look at things can really help, because then you can find that the children can each play to each other's strengths as well. So these are just the things that I was thinking of, Una, in terms of trying to get this studying doable, I suppose. Something I'd popped on one of my slides was this Pomodoro technique, which was talking about working for 25 minutes and then having a break and another 25 minutes. That can be really useful as well, because sometimes, let's face it, sometimes it's just a case of trying to cram in lots of information. And it's really difficult for us all, but especially for our neurodiverse kids. And it's difficult to know how you do it and how long you do it for. And so there are some techniques out there that are quite useful to help structure that. And one of them is this Pomodoro technique. I don't know if anyone's heard of it before, but that can be quite useful as well.
Definitely, yeah. There's so much in there, Don. I think the connections piece is really, really
Yeah,
vital, and for students that often, disconnect pieces of information, or when they're writing essays or structures, there's that piece and then there's that piece, and there isn't a lot of ties. And as we know from an exam setup perspective and as an examiner background, and that ties and how you could kind of create that link is where students get most of the marks. So definitely being able to kind of link different topics and different pieces of research or chapters is essential really to excelling in the education system. Still, you mentioned mind maps. We're a huge advocate of mind maps, but
yeah,
we've done a lot of research in this space personally because I really needed mind maps when I was in school. And we found that there's a set approach actually usually that works for students with learning difficulties. Now we do talk through this approach in some of our online workshops, and we bits and pieces on our website, but usually mind maps have to be done in some element of a sequential format, and they're usually in a particular way for them to be retained in long-term memory for people with neurodiverse issues. General mind maps where you just throw some words up and draw some pictures can be really good, but they can still, be not long term, let's say, memory storage and effective. So there's lots of research into particular mind maps approach. And again, you'll find some of it on our website, or feel free to look into it elsewhere online. But it can be a really useful tool, again, if used, in a suitable format. Just as an overview, our last few topics before we'll either open up to some questions, and again, Donna mentioned some content from her slides also. Um, Getting the right support, interacting with teachers, I think that's probably our most topical, from this slide. We have a lot of constant questions from parents about, that constant following up with schools, and, trying to advocate for support, and that never ending struggle for some households, and then other households, it's almost the opposite approach from their school interaction. Any suggestions that you might have on that side, Donna, for, a parent that finds it very difficult to interact with a school, or often finds it quite challenging to liaise with a teacher that maybe doesn't have that level of understanding that they would like them to have?
It's a tricky one, I think, isn't it, Una? We'd like to think that as parents and grandparents and so on, when we go into school, we're always going to be welcomed and so on. And happily, most of the time we are. But yes, every now and again, I think, and we certainly hear from folks here at Succeed that the relationship is not as we would want it to be. I think initially, as a parent, as a carer, it's about getting educated. If you find yourself in that situation, really, do a bit of, we're talking about homework, do a bit of homework yourself, really, in terms of what it is that you want to raise with the class teacher, head teacher, whoever it may be. Because sometimes in these situations, we are going to be our child's biggest advocate, really. And so we have to prepare for whatever that journey may be. And sometimes, yeah, it's not the best that we would like it to be. So I think it's about doing our homework and making sure that we get educated. I think then it's about um, keeping a track, really. Again, actually, we're talking about themes that we've been talking about our kids. It's keeping a track, keeping that thread for your own reference about, okay, you met with the teacher, the head teacher during this time, this is for your own reference. Keep a record of that, just some notes so that you can remember, so that when you return, if things still haven't been pursued, then again, you can log that and so on. So again, it's this about keeping that information with a view to however, that journey is going to resolve. I think it's also important to know that you're not on your own. There's lots of groups out there that can support and advise if you are going on a journey that's not the best with schools in that way. I know I spoke to someone a little while ago who'd been through the whole journey with her son, and some good, some bad with teachers and so on. And she said to kind of, in hindsight, what she wished she would have remembered, even when she was when she was linking with school in kind of tough situations, is to always remember that the teacher wants the best for the children that they work with. So it's not a personal thing against you. It's not something where you think that the teacher is is kind of purposely, if I can say, being uncooperative or whatever. The teacher ultimately does want what's best, but sometimes, as a parent, you can disagree with the teacher's viewpoint. But this particular mum was saying to me, sometimes she'd lost sight of that, and that had impacted where she'd got very, very upset, or she'd lost her temper, and that had kind of really affected the relationship. So I think it's important to stay calm. I know it's tricky when it's into your own child, but how it I think what could help with staying calm is by preparing and knowing that you know what you need to say, and going into that conversation as prepared as you can. I don't know if that answers that, Una. That's
It
just my
does,
thinking on
yeah.
from what you've said, because I'm glad you've raised it, because it does happen. It does happen, unfortunately, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And I think, I agree very much so that there can be an awful lot of challenges, and, probably one out of two in every student that we would work with would have had or still has, some element of a negative experience
Yeah.
that could be prevented or could be changed. And I think it's important to recognise as well that, from an Irish, let's say, system basis, unfortunately, lots of teacher training is still not where we would like it often to be, and teachers can be qualified over here to work with both younger students and secondary school students without really having a lot of formal training into how to work with students with learning difficulties, be it dyslexia or dyscalculia or anything across the board. So I think it's important to recognise that, they just at times may not have the skill set that we would like them to have, but that's not to say that that won't change, or that teachers will maybe, change to take up new courses. It just at times make it a difficult process. We did a webinar maybe about 5 or 6 weeks ago, so it's on our YouTube channel, guys, at Boston for Life, and with a really highly regarded education psychologist here in Ireland, and she looks into this topic a great deal because she coaches parents on how to get the best out of teachers and get the best out of a school
Oh,
setting. And
brilliant.
yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
that
a really
sounds great. Yeah.
good topic to, figure out how do you create that link, and how do you work in a system that often is a little bit challenging, and how do we move things through without being overbearing, or anything like that we get as a regular question. And just in the interest of time, guys, my apologies. I'll just put a feedback link in the chat if that's okay. And with everybody, I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind even filling it out now. I know that we're all busy, so usually when we all log off, it's not the topic of conversation for to-do this evening. But again, if people had any further things they'd like to address in that, I'd be delighted to answer any of those. And just before we do a few Q&As, just wanted to give a little bit of an outline. So we have a transition into secondary school workshop program that we've set up at the moment, and we ran it a few weeks ago live. It's also on sale at the moment on our website. We have lots of kids starting and moving into secondary school, so please let us know if you have any questions around that topic. Also, Dyslexia Awareness Month, which is amazing, and coming up in October, way sooner than what I thought it was going to be. But anyway, I don't know where the time's going. But we love doing talks and workshops. So if anybody had a school or an organisation, we'd be delighted to link in with them. Mentioned bits of our courses and workshops that we have online with some of our mind mapping techniques. And Donna mentioned earlier support groups. So we've set up a parent and teacher support group as well for people to interact and share topics and conversations. So then feel free to get on to us if you needed any other further support and assistance. Donna, was there anything from some of your slides? I know you mentioned some of your techniques. Was there anything else that we just didn't address today that you'd like to mention before we just open up to one or two questions?
No, I think we've covered a lot of, I think we've covered more than I thought we would, which is brilliant, Una. I mean, I can share the slides for anybody who'd like them, who've attended this, I know you have a copy, but I think we've talked through most of the things that I was planning to, unless I know you've looked at the slides. If there's anything in particular you think that you'd like me to share, or we just go straight to questions and see what we get.
Yeah, we might go straight to
Yeah.
questions if that's okay with everybody. Thank you all so much as well for joining, and it was a pleasure to have you all on.